In the peaceful village of Mako, a village located in the central part of Nigeria with a long flowing river with lush green hills on its sides. Mako was a happy place, and the villagers took pride in their serene way of life. The women were admired for their slender bodies. Everyone in Mako was stick-thin, and the women had long flowing hair that glowed in the sunlight. This slender, delicate figure was admired by their men, who went about bragging about having the slimmest wives. The men of Mako were content and loved their wives, or so everyone thought, until the day a boat washed ashore. It all started on an ordinary afternoon. The women were gathered at the riverbank, washing clothes and gossiping about village matters as the men fished nearby. Out of nowhere, a commotion broke the calm. A large wooden boat, rocking dangerously in the waves, appeared on the horizon. The people in the boat was screaming for help. As the boat drifted closer, the villagers watched in shock. Just as the boat reached the bank, it capsized, tossing its passengers into the water. At first, the villagers ran to help, fearing the worst. But as the women from the boat began to emerge from the water, the people of Mako stopped, their mouths wide open in surprise. These weren't ordinary women. No, these were women unlike any they had ever seen before. They had enormous hips and backsides that seemed too abnormal. It swayed with every step and got the men of Mako wondering. Their presence caused a stir that would ripple through the entire village. The men who had been fishing just moments earlier dropped their nets and stood in awe. Their eyes widened and their jaws hung open as they stared, mesmerized by the sight before them. Even Chief Abiyam, the most respected elder, was seen adjusting his gaze repeatedly, convinced his eyes were deceiving him. "By the gods," whispered Obinna, a man known for his quiet nature. Sounded like a boy discovering fire for the first time. Where did these enormous women come from? Soon enough, word spread like wildfire. Men who hadn't been at the river that afternoon left their huts, some still carrying half-eaten yams, and rushed to the riverbank to catch a glimpse of the curvy strangers. It didn't take long before all the men of Mako abandoned their daily chores. Husbands were confused and became clumsy fools, each trying to outdo the other in impressing the voluptuous newcomers. The village erupted into chaos. The men competed over who could bring the most gifts to the curvy women: fish, fresh fruits, and even hand-carved trinkets. Some of them, like Mina, who hadn't touched a hoe in his whole life, suddenly became farmers overnight, bringing baskets of yams and cassava to the riverbank in hopes of winning a smile from the strangers. Even Emeka, a man who was barely audible and was labeled the mute of Mako, attempted a love song. All the birds flew from the trees when he tried singing. This, however, drew laughter out of the curvy women, and they politely applauded him. This made Emeka feel like the star of the day and made other men jealous. Suddenly, every man with a voice wanted to impress the women with their horrible singing. The women of Mako watched these antics with growing fury. Their husbands, who had once adored their slender figures and long hair, were now completely entranced by the visitors. The men no longer cared about how gracefully their wives moved or how their hair gleamed in the sun. No, it was all about the hips. Their husbands were obsessed. And so, jealousy took root in the hearts of the village women. They gathered in secret, meeting late at night under the old tree, whispering of how to win back their husband's attention, and investigating on how a boat filled with heavy women sailed to their village. "We have to change," said Nika, one of the more outspoken wives and the prettiest and slimmest woman in Mako. "If it's big hips and backsides they want, then we shall give it to them." All the other women hailed in unison and applauded Nika for her brilliant idea. The problem is that they had never been heavy eaters in Mako. Men and women ate lightly, so the women had to find ways to unlearn their healthy habits. Anyway, the plan was hatched. From that day on, the women of Mako abandoned their usual diets of fruits and vegetables. They began feasting morning, noon, and night. Pounded yam, fufu, agusi soup, tuwo, eba, and cocoa yam. Whatever they could get their hands on, they ate. Uduak, known for being as thin as a reed, now sat at every meal with a bowl of pounded yam the size of a small mountain, declaring between bites, "I'll show him hips." At first it was a laughable sight. The women, once so delicate, began stuffing themselves at every opportunity. But it wasn't long before the effects started to show. Their skirts began to tighten, and soon the women of Mako started waddling through the village with an unfamiliar bounce in their step. They met at their usual meeting place and sat measuring each other's hips. Neka had grown from a delicate size 20 hips to size 48 in just a matter of weeks. The least person at that meeting measured size 40. This made her sad as she felt she was being left behind. Their husbands, initially impressed, quickly realized that things were spiraling out of control. Their wives had become so fat that could hardly walk. One evening, as the women sat down for another feast at Mama Mako's hut, they noticed something peculiar. They were too full to move. No one could stand on her feet. Their plan had worked a little too much. Each woman rolled over the floor and managed to get on their feet. As they walked through the village footpath, the earth shook because of their sizes. Days passed and many of the women found themselves unable to leave their huts at all. Ada, who had once been known for her graceful walks, now struggled to fit through her front door. Mama Mako, the village elder, concerned for her fellow women, tried to intervene, but even she had grown a little rounder from the late-night snacking. The women, now immobile, made the men of Mako distraught. They could no longer go see the beautiful women from the boat, as they had to stay at home with their immobile wives and do all the chores themselves. There were no more home-cooked meals waiting for them after a long day. Rather, they would make the entire meals for the day if they had to go out on their business and return home to make fresh meals for their wives and themselves. With their wives constantly asking for snacks and help to move around, the men began to realize that maybe hips and backsides weren't everything after all. In the midst of this chaos, rumors began to spread among the women about the curvy visitors. The women who had been given one of the best apartments in town were enjoying every bit of attention being showered on them by men of Mako. But the rumors won't go away. It was alleged that the women traveled from village to village using their body shapes to lure men into submission and stealing their destinies. Driven by curiosity and desperation, the women of Mako decided to sneak out one night and discover the secret to the curves they so desired, and maybe it would lead them to the truth about the women. Late one evening, they gathered in secret behind Mama Mako's hut. Dressed in black, they crept through the forest to the lodge where the curvy women were staying. They crouched behind the bushes, waiting to hear the secret of the curves. But what they overheard left them stunned. "If only we had the long, flowing hair of these village women," one of the curvy women sighed. "I know," replied another, "and their slim, graceful figures. It must be so nice to move freely without all this baggage we are carrying about." "My back is killing me," she said, grabbing her buttocks. "My chest aches, not to talk of my knees carrying all this weight," said another. The women of Mako could hardly believe their ears. The very women they had envied so deeply were jealous of them. They stared at one another, wide-eyed, realizing in that moment how absurd the whole situation had become. They carried themselves home, but didn't get home before dawn, as they could hardly walk faster than a turtle. Each of them eventually got home and was summoned for an emergency meeting at the village square by Mama Mako. Standing tall despite her newly acquired curves, she addressed the crowd with her husband Chief Abena pretending to be listening while his gaze was at the beautiful women walking to the river. "We've all been fools," she said. "The women we envied envy us in return. We were beautiful before, and we are beautiful now. Well, I don't mean with all these mounds of fat around our faces and necks. I meant when we were thin. But it's time to stop chasing after what isn't meant for us." The women of Mako nodded, embarrassed but relieved. Slowly they returned to their normal lives, leaving behind their wild feasts and slimming down to their natural figures once again. As for the men, they too learned a valuable lesson. They became afraid of the women once they heard the rumors about the women. They also learned that beauty wasn't just about curves or flowing hair. It was about appreciating the person standing beside you. The curvy women, still unaware of the chaos they had caused, eventually left Mako, setting sail to another village. As they waved goodbye, the people of Mako rejoiced and laughed, remembering how they had once fought over who had the better figure, only to realize that everyone was beautiful in their own way. And so peace returned to Mako, and the village women, with their long hair flowing in the breeze, continued to charm their husbands with their wit, grace, and newfound confidence. The men, wiser from their experience, never took their wives for granted again. And whenever someone mentioned the curvy women, the villagers would laugh, remembering the time they snuck through the forest in search of beauty secrets that didn't exist, only to discover that the real secret had been within them all along. The end. Did you enjoy the story? What do you think beauty is? How would you define it? Please share your thoughts in the comments section, then like and share the story with your friends and family to encourage someone who feels less of themselves. Subscribe to our channel. Thank you.